Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Sci-Cafe, the first one of the year in January. Sorry, we've been having some technical difficulties on the research reserve side for some reason, but I think we have most of them worked out. Can't get my camera to work, but I'm Anita Grove, and Alicia Bruno is here with me, and we will be producing today's meeting. We'd like to welcome Josh Adams with the Appalachia Regional Planning Council, and Rick Harter. But we've had a lot of conversations since the rocks have gone into the bay on the Franklin-98 project. I think there's a lot of constructive conversations going on, and so we decided to get Rick and Josh, the main players, online to give us an update. Take it away.
Okay, is everybody able to see full screen good?
Yes, we can see
All
your
right.
screen.
We'll get this thing kicked off, and to make up for some lost time, I'll get my portion over with. So thank you for having us today. Josh Adams with the Appalachia Regional Planning Council, and we have Rick Harter, formerly WSP, and I think Anita was just asking Rick about that, but he has his own consulting shop. So Rick, if you would just like to state that when you do come on. But today we want to give you an overview. So this is the Franklin-98 project that has been in some way, shape, or form at least 5 years in the making. So we were working on this project in 2019, doing the planning and outreach work, and we're real excited to show y'all some construction photos and a video. On this screen, we can see the Franklin-98 shoreline, the south side of the highway, at a low tide, so you're able to get a really good idea of that shoreline out there. So we completed that phase one. We're well into the phase two, which is seeing the construction and some monitoring underway. That's through the Emergency Coastal Resiliency Fund. That was Hurricane Michael dollars, so that is not coming. None of that fund comes from general revenue, state of Florida, local. That's all federal money, and then the rest is going to come from the Gulf Environmental Benefit Fund, which are award funds from Treasury from the Gulf oil spill money. And then we're going to take you through some of the construction and then the plantings that will be installed and have had some installations. And I'll be switching it over to Rick to do a little deeper dive into some of the construction techniques and methods. But so just to give an overview for anyone that hasn't seen our presentation before. So what are the values of living shorelines, and why might we utilize those instead of just seawall or riprap hard armoring? So on the right side of this image, we've got some of that harder armoring, and on the left would be a totally natural shoreline. And you can see some of the different benefits of having that type of living ecology infrastructure present, rather than just having that hardened infrastructure, gray infrastructure as we call it, which preempts habitat. In a lot of cases, it stops the ability for that natural ecosystem to develop to changing conditions. So this next slide here is the green to gray. So you'll notice on the left, vegetation only. On the right side, bulkheads, revetments. Our project falls into the middle ground with sills and breakwaters. And so this kind of speaks to some of the questions that we've seen over the last few months as to why some of the structures are placed the way that they are, some of the considerations that went into that. Rick will be touching on in a little bit. But I think that key in again to these, the sills and the breakwater graphic and keep that in mind as you see some of these pictures that we have for you. So these images were taken shortly after Hurricane Michael. That's why we are able to see large portions of the right-of-way destroyed and impacted by strong wave environment. So you're able to see riprap, and this just generally characterizes parts of the roadway. We've got 2 more images on the next slide. A very old seawall on that left side that has also had riprap added to it. I believe that might be a section close to an outfall, but then you also are able to see on the right side some of the caving in of the fill that's been put down along the right of way, exposing concrete and then riprap again. And I think that at this point, I'll go ahead and let Rick talk over me, and I'll progress the slides, Rick. So if you just want to give me some indication when you're ready for that
Okay.
the transition will go and turn it over to Rick now.
Okay, I'm ready, and I apologize for the audio not working properly. It worked a few minutes ago when we sound checked it and disappeared. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you.
All right. So thank you. So we're going to go through some slides talking that show you the construction process that's taking place. I'm sure many, if not all of you, have now seen this, wondering what's going on, what is all this equipment doing out there, what are all those rocks. If you weren't already familiar with what was going on in terms of the project planning and the input we were seeking during the design, well, this is phase 1 that's under construction. And I'll show you a map in a little while that shows you the boundaries of phase 1. And we've got phase 2 in process of moving it forward so that it can go, that it can follow phase 1. And so just showing you some things here, as you've probably seen, these rocks are being placed out there in organically shaped reef structures. They are being placed in areas that are appropriate depths so that we can establish oysters on them, but also we are putting them in areas where we are avoiding the existing seagrass beds. So those are some key factors that dictate where the rocks will go and where they're not going. You've probably seen a lot of these white PVC poles sticking out of the water, these pipes. Those are put out to mark the footprint of where the reefs go. You may have seen our crews out there marking, like with 2 of these pipes with a rope between them. And what we're doing there is we're actually measuring a distance off of the existing seagrass beds to make sure that we leave adequate buffer so that there's really no chance of any impacts to the seagrasses, because we don't want to put rocks right next to a seagrass bed. And you've also probably noticed that we are putting in rocks both from shore and from land, mostly from land right now, and really through most of the project, just because the reefs are in such shallow water that they are accessible from land, and we don't have to worry about dealing with tides to get a barge in. Taking a lot of steps to minimize any impacts that could occur during construction. We work, I say we, it's really the construction contractor, which is the prime contractor is North Florida Construction, and they have a couple of subcontractors, Coastline Construction, or Coastline Clearing, and Jason White Construction. Coastline Clearing is really doing the bulk of the work right now, at least in this phase. So most of the crews that you see out there and equipment is them. They're doing an excellent job. And so let's go ahead to the next slide. We've got quite a few of these showing different steps in the construction. All right, so what you see here is, the reefs from shore. In other words, they're not right up against the shore. Really, the intent is to put them out in the water so that they can colonize with oysters, and so that they can allow an intertidal area between the reefs and the shore where intertidal marsh can be established. The picture on the right shows that they're very flat across the top. The purpose for that is we're really trying we're very precise in the elevation that we're seeking. The goal is to build these reefs so that they will get colonized with oysters and, of course, other organisms as well. But oysters are going to be and I guess barnacles are going to be the primary organisms that'll attach themselves to the rocks. And so oysters don't grow out of the water; they only grow in the water. They're basically going up to that natural elevation where that oysters like. Let's go to the next slide, please. Here's another picture. This is at the school, looking towards the east. This is probably, I don't know, a mid tide, I guess. On a low tide, you could walk out to the reefs without getting your feet wet in a lot of cases. And at a high tide, they'll be completely underwater. Next slide, please. Okay, so I believe, Josh, this is the one with the video, right? Or the animation video?
Yep, that's correct. So we've got a
so what we've
short
got here,
video here.
Okay, you can probably go ahead and hit play while I'm talking here. And so it's kind of hard to tell, but the excavator is on a mat, a platform. And so whenever the equipment is out there driving, there you can see it much better. It's actually sitting on a mat, and then it's picking up a rock, moving it over, and dropping it on another mat. And then that bigger excavator is also on a mat, and it's reaching over and picking up the rocks and swinging around and putting them on the reefs. And so whenever these are out there working like this, they are on those construction platforms, and the excavators will also sometimes go on top of the reefs and use the reefs as a construction platform. So we're trying to really minimize the driving across or working in the intertidal area. It's quick in and out, minimizing the footprint. And there is an added benefit. If you look here closely on the left, you'll see one of those excavators is sitting on one of the reefs. But there's an added benefit to that, and that is by driving across those rocks with the excavator, really presses them into place, minimizes any, or I guess really accelerates any settling that's going to occur, and ultimately makes for a more stable reef. Let's go to the next slide, please. And so here you can see this is an area of Tatel State Forest where these reefs have been placed. Unlike many and probably most living shoreline type projects, they're often just drawn, like designed to be a straight line. Well, one of our goals was really to maximize the habitat value, as well as to maximize the natural look. And so we are avoiding straight lines as much as possible. Here's another picture from a drone. This is at the school. And what you can see here is a couple of things. That it's fairly high tide. The reefs are not totally submerged, but they're getting close to it. You can see the excellent wave attenuation that's occurring here. There's whitecaps on the right side, or the seaward side of those reefs. And then over on the left side, or the landward side of the reefs, it's very calm, which is going to make for perfect conditions to establish salt marsh. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So here, this is a aerial view from the area behind the Eastpoint breakwater. That is their loading area for all the rocks that come into the site by barge. Here's the barge that they're using, one of the barges they're using, and the shallow draft push boat they're using. And so essentially they drop the rocks here, put them on the barge, and then drive the barge down to the area where they're going to be placed. As I mentioned, the contractor is very dependent on the tides and very conscientious about the tides. So all of the landward deployment they'll do only at low tides, and only those tides that are low enough for them to get out there and work, without the water being lapping up against the reef footprint or their equipment. And then for the water deployment with the barge, they only come in at the highest of tides and then drop the rocks and get back out of that area before the tide goes back down. So WSP has staff on site inspecting everything that's going on, making sure that not only is the project being built according to the design and the permits, but also making adjustments as we go regarding the actual reef footprint. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. I don't know why this one looks like the photo didn't load totally. This was a picture of the barge with the excavator on it, deploying rocks. Okay, so once the reefs are all constructed, then the next step is to plant some salt marsh. And so primarily, the plants that are being used are Spartina alterniflora, smooth cordgrass. They're being grown in what I call a quart-sized pot, or a 4-inch by 4-inch by about 6-inch deep pot, plant container. And they're being grown at a nursery that the Conservation Corps of the Forgotten Coast operates, and they're doing the installation of the plants as well. We are planting in very dense clumps because that's been shown to be very effective in getting restoration plants established. You can see on the top left, that is a site that actually we planted during the summer, without any reefs. There's lots of seagrass beds there. There is really nowhere to put reefs without impacting seagrass beds, and it's really about the only place within the project area that we see salt marsh with naturally growing, and it's because it's the way the shoreline is shaped and the water depths. It's just very well protected. There's the water's calm enough that this plants can get established. So it doesn't take much wave attenuation for the marsh to get established, and that area is good enough as it is. So those plants are really taking well. It's kind of hard to tell just yet, but this growing season, it's going to really take off. I was out there a couple weeks ago, and there's lots of new shoots coming up of the Spartina. So it's gonna look really good once those plants hit the growing season this summer. Here's a picture of the plant nursery where the plants are being grown. This is again, it's operated by Conservation Corps of the Forgotten Coast, which is part of Franklin's under the Franklin's Promise Coalition. And They're also growing Spartina patens as well, which is salt meadow cordgrass, but it's primarily the smooth cordgrass or the alterniflora. And right now they're out doing work at the school. So here's a map that shows the different areas. The school is over on the left there. The red polygons are phase 1. The sort of turquoise or color is what is proposed for phase 2. And so we've got the school site to the west, Tate's Hell State Forest in the middle, and then another parcel of Tate's Hell State Forest over to the east. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Actually, you know what? Could you go back to that map again? So one of the things I want to point out here is what are the overall boundaries of the project as it's defined now? And so it goes essentially west, close to the breakwater, somewhere east of the breakwater, and we don't know exactly what that western boundary is yet. It depends on what property owners come forward and say, hey, yeah, I want to, host part of this project along my property. And then going to the east, we stop just on the west side of Yent Bayou. And there are a number of reasons for that. One is once you get east of Yent Bayou, it's got a lot more wave energy coming through the pass. So those waves that are generated out in the Gulf of Mexico, they have their way to work. They're able to work their way in, and because of that higher wave energy and the close proximity to the pass, it's higher salinity, and it creates more of a beachy situation with sandy beaches, and there are a lot of houses actually between the road, and the shoreline. Once you get to Yent Bayou, you don't have any houses between the road and the shoreline within our project area. And so, a big part of this funding is really focused on protecting public infrastructure, not so much, private houses. And so having those areas, focusing on those areas where there's vulnerable roadways that public uses, and then the fact is the salinity makes it much less desirable for oyster reef establishment because there's a higher incidence of predation and really just less oyster colonization. The reefs would still be somewhat useful from the standpoint of reducing wave energy, which would help with erosion. But it really just wasn't as suitable for the project needs. And the other big reason is a lot of folks from Yent Bayou to the east really they didn't want to have such a big change to their sandy beach shoreline, which is understandable because a lot of those beaches are pretty nice. So with those two factors in place, we said, okay, you know what, we're just going to focus on the west side of Yent Bayou, and you'll see, there's some gaps here between these phases. We want to fill all those in. There's funding available. In order to do that, we just need property owners to agree to have the project built, offshore of their property, and it won't cost them anything. There is a legal agreement that they need to sign that basically says the mean high water line now is going to continue to be the property boundary into the future, even if the shoreline changes. The State Division of State Lands, has this concern that if the project accretes a lot of shoreline, that it's basically giving property owners more land, and the state would lose that land. So by having the mean high water line boundary line agreement in place, it will avoid that. personally, I don't think that that's going to happen with sea level rise, and because of the low elevation design of our reefs, and really our goal is to create intertidal area, which means it's below mean high water line. It's really, I don't think, a concern, but it alleviates those concerns from the state. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so these next 3 slides show you zoomed in of the reefs and the construction status as of a couple of weeks ago. A little outdated, but not too much. So all of these reefs at the school are already constructed. You'll see these, this turquoise color on this slide shows that they're constructed. On the later slides, you'll see some are constructed and some aren't yet. I'm just going to point out one other thing here, which may be a little premature, but I don't think so. And that is there are some proposed locations for waterway markers. So we've always had the plan that once the project is constructed, then some of the reefs or some of the areas will be marked to prevent any hazards to navigation, to alert boaters that, hey, there's a reef there. And so it's not yet totally decided where those are going to go, but we're just starting that discussion of, okay, where are some potential locations where they might go. All right, next. Okay, so this is it's a different scale the map is, because the site is actually much bigger than the school. But again, this is shows oh, you know what? I'm sorry. This isn't showing the status. This is just showing the waterway marks. Anyways, yeah, this shows you takes the middle site with some proposed marker locations, some of which we feel are, make the most sense, and others that are sort of optional, I guess. And then here's the east site. I will point out there's a couple of reefs here on this one, kind of farther from shore in the deeper waters, where we intend to put some of those concrete dome reef modules, reef balls. That may not be on both of those little reefs, but at least on one of them. Really just for some comparison between that and the rocks. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so I mentioned that, the kind of the rationale for why are we putting the reefs in the shapes and locations where they're going. And, probably the major driver one of the major drivers for that, again, is the seagrass beds and avoiding seagrass beds. We love seagrass beds. We don't want to impact them in any way. But that offers some challenges because the seagrass beds are very dynamic. They move, the boundaries of the beds change seasonally and annually. I mean, even within a few months, you can have some fairly significant changes. So I just want to illustrate that here with some comparisons. So this is aerial photo from 2022, and the next slide is 2023. And so if we put those side by side, next slide, please. It's the same location, and so these circles are essentially the same locations. What I want you to see is the difference. So like on the left, that red circle shows some seagrass beds that were, they're kind of pretty dense in some areas, but is broken up into multiple beds. But on the right, they are really coalesced more into one solid bed with a clear boundary. If you look at the blue circle, same thing. You kind of started off with really not a lot of seagrass in the first place, and then getting some pretty significant seagrass beds over on the right. And so the some areas you lose the grasses, other areas you gain the grasses. in general, it stays pretty stable, but they're constantly the boundaries are constantly moving. And so even if we, we're doing these seagrass surveys, figuring out where the seagrasses are in each of the areas that we're designing as we go. But 6 months or a year later, we don't want to just go based on what was observed 6 months prior. We want to field verify it. And so that's what we're doing when we're placing those stakes out in the water, is we're actually field verifying, making sure that we know where the seagrass bed is at the time of construction. And it's not as easy to see the seagrass boundaries during the off season like this, but we've got folks that have been doing this long enough. The average person, you put them out there, they may not really realize there's a grass bed there, but we know what to look for. You can check for the roots and rhizomes with your fingers in the sand, and verify if there is or isn't one. So anyways, it's just a super important aspect of the project. And then also, the project, or the purpose of the reefs it's really twofold. One is to create habitat, and two is because the reefs help provide that wave attenuation that helps stabilize the shoreline and allows the marshes to grow so that those can stabilize the shoreline and provide habitat. And so how do we know that oysters are going to do well in the project area? Well, we've been doing monitoring here at the site for several years now. If you would go back to that graph, please. So what I want to show you here is the peak on each of these curves shows you that over the last 4 years, the average population of oysters, and these are collected at the same sites every year for 4 years. And in the blue, which is the first year we started this, the peak was very far to the left. They were very small oysters. I mean, like a centimeter. Okay, so not very big, like as big as your thumbnail. And then each year, that peak moved a little bit farther to the right, meaning they're getting bigger. And then the height of those peaks tells you how many oysters there were per square meter, or it was actually the quadrats we're using per quarter square meter, but same concept goes. How many oysters per square foot? What's the density, in other words? So what we're seeing is over time, the oysters are generally getting bigger, and there's more of them. So both of those are really good. Next slide, please. The other reason we know that oysters are going to grow in this area is because they're already growing. On the left, that is a part of a log that was in the water at the Tate's Hell East site. I hit it at a really, really low tide one day and saw this sticking out of the water. I mean, it was extremely low tide. And I was just amazed at how many oysters were growing on that. Very, very nice looking oysters. So there's a ton of them there. The picture on the right is just east of the school parcel. It's actually within the phase 2 parcel that's next to the school. And so that's just riprap that when it was put in, it was out deep enough at a low enough elevation that it gets inundated with the tides every day enough that it could support extensive oyster growth. And so, within a couple of years, that's what our reefs are going to look like. Okay, next slide, please. In fact, we have already started observing some oysters at our site. So on the picture on the left, that's the pier for the school. What's left of the pier, the pilings from the pier, and one of the reefs that went in. Just to the east of that pier is the very first reef that was installed, and it was installed by hand. It was recycled concrete that the Conservation Corps of the Forgotten Coast deployed by hand. Did a great job. And when we marked the footprint of that, the perimeter, with some PVC pipes, that was the first thing to go in the water, right? We marked it before they started placing them, and it was the first reef to go in. Well, those pipes stayed in there. They got in the water early enough that the fall spawning of the oysters allowed those larvae to settle on the PVC pipes and grow into oysters. So that's what that pipe is there that's being held. It's got quite a few decent-sized oysters on them. Next slide, please. So these are some photos of the base of that very first reef that went in, and you can almost tell exactly when the spawning occurred, or when when the larvae settled, because not all of the reef has oysters on it. It was only probably like the first quarter of the reef, and then after that, there were no more spat settling, but the rocks kept going in. So if you want to see some oysters getting colonized on the reef, it's the reef at the school that's farthest to the east. Okay, next slide, please. So one other thing I want to mention too, these are not oysters from the site, but we're going to be working with FSU Coastal Marine Lab and a local oyster farmer to do some experimentation with seeding the reefs that we've installed with some mature oysters. And so what these are is actually, when the oyster farmer's oysters don't live for whatever reason, and it ends up just being a dead shell, instead of them just throwing those shells overboard, they hold on to them for a while because they've got a bunch of natural settlement occurring on them. Barnacles, tunicates, lots of oysters. You got all kinds of great organisms that are settled onto those. And so what he's done is he's worked with the Nature Conservancy on a grant program they've got called SOAR, and I can't remember exactly what that stands for, but it's basically working with watermen to help support habitat restoration. And so this individual, John Harley, worked under that TNC grant, the Nature Conservancy grant, and grew out a bunch of this, we'll call it bycatch material. And so we want to use that material to seed the reefs. And we're going to be working with or coordinating with the folks at FSU Coastal Marine Lab. We've set up an experimental design where we're going to place the oysters on 10 individual reefs and start looking to see if, try to answer the question, does placing mature oysters on these rocks increase the rate of settlement of more oysters? And there's quite a bit of literature out there that suggests that it will. Everything from chemical cues to auditory signals, like the fact that, like, if you've ever been snorkeling or diving and you're on a reef site, you can hear all sorts of things, fish cracking and popping noises and stuff like that. So it's not real clear what all the signals are, and it's probably multiple signals, I'm guessing. But we think that by strategically placing some of these materials on those reefs, it may accelerate colonization of the reefs. It may not, but we don't know until we we try it and do some monitoring and collect some data. Next slide. There we go. So I think that's it, and I guess we can open it up for questions.
Okay. Thank you, Rick. We appreciate that, and Josh. We were also going to show the video, Charles's video. Josh, you want to?
Oh, yeah, let's do that.
Show that. We also have Charles and Ethan from the Conservation Corps on the phone, and they shot this video of some of the planting they did right near the school.
So this is their crew unloading some plants, taking them out to the first area that they planted, which is located between the school site and the Tate's Hell western parcel. Messy job, but they did a great job, and this time of year the Spartina is not as lush and green as it was then, right in the middle of the growing season, and just the act of planting it and moving it and everything, it stresses the plant some. And then we've had a number of storms and everything eating away. So if you go out right now, you won't see it nice and lush like this, but I can assure you, give it about 2 or 3 months of growing season this year, and it's going to look even better than this picture right now, just because it goes through that acclimation phase of being put out in the environment, and now it's going to really take off, because you can see that the plants have sent rhizomes and new runners out like a foot from where they planted before already. So,
Great.
does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I was going to do a little bit of fill-in. This is Anita again. Just sometimes we look at stuff so closely we forget that people who are not familiar may not see the 30,000-foot view. But as Josh mentioned early on, there's been a lot of conversation about tax dollars. This effort was paid for by the Gulf Environmental Benefit Fund, which was put into a fund to help, as it says, to benefit the environment and create new habitat. And it was a result of fines levied on BP. And so these were accessible to anybody on the Gulf, and Franklin County was lucky enough to get the funds. The money would have been there regardless. And so also this shoreline, we have had, as many people know who live here, it is our main evacuation route out of the county during a storm. And I have been one of those people on 98 way too late and having the water come over my car as I'm trying to leave the county, and the road fails in multiple places, and we all know where those places are. So what we did, we had the U.S. Naval Academy come in a number of years ago and do an initial survey, and they determined that yes, using this type of protection on the shoreline would help us. So then the Rick and Josh's organizations have been a part of writing the grants to make this happen. And essentially it's going from using a hardened structure like a seawall to a more sloped structure that has rocks out in front of it that will deflect the energy, and it'll also create habitat for local fishermen and the animals, birds and marine life. So it's a much more natural shoreline, and it will grow into place rather than being a concrete wall that can just be overtopped by a storm. We've seen that work really well. We have several in the county that have been here for 25 years, and it's worked well. We have a lot of data on this, and I know, Hurricane Michael, you can see many shorelines that have since been improved in the same manner because of the data we have now that it's working. All right. Alicia, you want to take more questions?
Yeah, sure. We have one question here in the chat. It's from Jean Hamilton. So the reef rock old concrete, or are there other types of rock being utilized in this project?
Good question. No, most of the rock is not old concrete. When the bid package went out, we gave them an option for using recycled concrete with the thought that it might be more accessible, it might be less costly, and it might even be, more environmentally friendly, I guess you could say. And none of the contractors opted for giving a cost for the recycled concrete. So it's all from quarries, and except for that one reef that was constructed by the Conservation Corps that did use some recycled concrete that would have otherwise filled up part of the county landfill.
Okay, thank you. And then I had a question. Will the public be able to use this area for recreation, like fishing or crabbing, things like that?
Absolutely. In fact, this is going to be the best place along the whole stretch of shoreline for fishing and crabbing. I can pretty much guarantee it. And I hope that people will use it for that.
Yeah, I've had some conversations with people and they seem very excited about floundering and stuff in this area now.
Make a comment too as far as fishing. When we were doing the design, we had a number of public workshops where we worked to identify existing uses. We didn't want to have any negative impact on existing uses. And so one of the uses, well, floundering is one of the uses that people mentioned, but definitely cast netting for mullet and wade fishing. So we made sure that we left adequate access and areas that are going to be untouched for those types of activities to continue.
Okay, that's great. And then you also talked about a phase 2 that's going to start. Do you have like a date for that or predicted time that phase 2 will start?
I would venture to guess that it's going to start in the next 3 to 4 months is my guess. Hopefully sooner. It's we've still got to get through permitting for it, and or some permitting for it, and get some legal agreements signed. But we've got the areas identified. We've got the design done for it and everything. We already have the Corps of Engineers permit for the entire project area. And we also have the state permit, a conceptual permit that covered phase 1, but really it was an application for the whole project. We just need to now get each additional individual phase through the state process. But we don't anticipate any major holdups there. It's just getting these mean high waterline boundary agreements signed is really the major challenge there.
Okay. Awesome, thanks. Diane Needhart has a question, and I think this will be a good segue into allowing Jeff Dutro to come off mute after the question's answered. But she wants to know, since you're working so closely to the school, has there been any educational outreach planned?
You know, we certainly hope that there is going to be. We've made some efforts to try to contact the folks at the school that might be interested in doing that. I don't know that we've successfully connected the right people yet. But Joe Taylor from Franklin's Promise has some contacts there at the school, and I think that Evan Blythe from Appalachia Regional Planning Council has made some efforts to make that connection. But we really think that there's a great learning opportunity here. And so I'll mention the pier at the school. I hope that someday that will get rebuilt, but that will give easy access for students and really the public to have a really close-up view on what's going on, because it'd be, right there, easy access to the multiple kinds of reefs, because it's got the reef balls. There's a couple of reef balls there. I say a couple, I think it's 7. There's those reef balls, and then there's 2 different kinds of rock material. There's the recycled concrete, and there's the rocks, the natural rocks. And then there's going to be the marsh. There's also a storm drain, well, multiple storm drains there. So there could be all sorts of great water quality monitoring that compares water quality close to the storm drain as opposed to farther from the storm drain, or within the marsh or outside of the marsh. There could be comparing concrete versus rock. There could be comparing the reefs versus the reef balls. There's lots of great opportunities that I'm hoping that the school will be involved.
Yeah, that's awesome. Our education program here actually the other day started talking to the Ed Course students about the project, and I see Jeff is unmuted now, so he's going to go ahead and ask some of the questions that those students came up with.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Alicia. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hallelujah. I really appreciate the question about just kind of outreach to students, particularly at the school. I should mention that we've actually been doing that work with local students since 2011, where behind Anner Reserve proper, we have an extensive living shoreline where the kids in 5th grade plant grasses every year. Every 5th grader attends that every year. And we're tracking and monitoring the density of those grasses. And then in 7th grade, they come back and do a pretty extensive food web assessment. And that's same kids coming back every 7th grader. So we've been into that for quite a while. So they certainly got a good foothold on the idea over all those years. But as far as working with the local EdCore group, which is the affiliate alternative school with the core, we had them here this week and started out with some images of these fancy rocks out there in the water that everybody's seen, and they asked a bunch of questions, many of which you did answer in the presentation, which we're going to show them this presentation tomorrow. One that was interesting that was brought up by Kendra that I don't think has been answered. She wondered why this pattern of rocks hasn't been used before.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know what? I'm a biologist, or more accurately, an ecologist, and too often, these types of projects are designed with more of an engineering perspective by folks who build roadways and sidewalks and bridges and skyscrapers. And these are oyster reefs and salt marshes. They're not roadways and bridges. And so personally, I think it's just the engineered tendency to have those straight lines, and maybe not really having as much focus on creating something intentionally that looks natural. And I think that's why we really went into this with a major intention of making it look as natural as possible. Really our goal is that 5 years from now, you can take somebody to the site who's never been there and tell them, yeah, there's this, multi-million-dollar shoreline protection and habitat restoration project, and they go out there and they look and they're like, well, I don't see anything built here. I just see these, reefs and marshes. And what did you build? We want it to look natural.
Well, that helps. I'm sure Ken will appreciate that answer. And I would add that you can go behind Anner and see a really successful project right now that all these kids, a whole lineage of them, are real proud of. So if I can ask one more question, one was from Emma, and she was hoping you could elaborate on some of the other types of creatures that'll benefit or live in the habitat created by the rocks.
Okay, sure. I certainly will elaborate on that. But first, I will say I have been to those areas that the students planted behind the breakwater Aner, and it looks great. They're doing a great job. Tell them to keep up the good work. In fact, we use some of those marshes as our reference areas when we're doing our monitoring because they look so good. But some of the other creatures that would be using these reefs and the marshes, in addition to the oysters themselves, of course, on the rocks, you'll have things like barnacles and encrusting algae, and you'll have all of the different critters that feed on those, things like black drum and sheep's head, and different types of mollusks like crown conchs. You even have oyster drills, which is a type of a predator to the oysters, as well as the crown conchs. They'll be there feeding on them, but the expectation is that they are part of the system, and that there will be plenty of oysters to keep them fed, and that they won't decimate the reefs. As far as the marshes, there's blue crabs and other types of crabs like fiddler crabs will like to be in those marshes. Even ribbed mussels like to get established at the base of a lot of the Spartina alterniflora or smooth cordgrass plants. And really, one of the things that we're not intentionally establishing in here, although it could be a follow-up phase, is the seagrasses. The seagrasses are growing out there where they are now. I expect and predict that in the areas that are too deep for marsh but are around the reefs, I think the seagrasses are going to take off. I think they're going to be benefited very highly because the reefs and the marsh help improve water clarity, and that's a key factor for seagrass success because the seagrasses need light, and they also need to have they benefit from protection of waves. They don't need it, but the calmer the water, they generally do better. And so once you have those seagrass beds, those have lots and lots of different organisms that really like them. Shrimp and flounder and things like that are really going to spend more time in the seagrass bed than on just an unvegetated area. So there's a few of them to talk about.
Awesome, thank you. And then we have a question from Kennard Watson. They want to know, what are the sea level rise predictions for this area in the 2100 timeframe, and how will the project be impacted under worst case predictions?
That's a good question. Sea level rise predictions are a tricky thing to talk about because, first of all, they're predictions, and if you've ever watched the weather forecast, they usually can't get it right 24 hours into the future. Sea level is a little bit different. It's not quite as variable as the weather, but you're ultimately dealing with factors that you don't know yet. So that they have different scenarios. They have the low acceleration of sea level rise. They have the high and the intermediate, and the high intermediate, and the low intermediate. And so it's like, okay, well, whose set of assumptions do you want to go with? So let's just put it this way. Within the last 100 years, we've had a half a foot to a foot of sea level rise. Within the next 100 years, we can expect to have at least a half a foot to a foot. Could be 1 feet, could be 2, could be 3. Some people say it could be 6. And so it's really hard to know for sure. But we do know that it is rising, and it's going to rise at least a half a foot in the next 100 years, probably much higher. The current rate of increase, I believe, is about 2 to 2.5. I think it's like 2.3 or 2.4 millimeters per year. Okay, so that's basically a centimeter every 10 years. No, an inch every 10 years. That's about an inch every 10 years. So that gives you something to base it on, just based on what's been happening. Of course, a lot of people have different views on certain tipping points that will accelerate climate change or accelerate sea level rise, things like melting of polar ice caps and things like that. But again, it's like kind of hard to predict. But we do know it's rising. And so, really, to answer your question about how will the project respond, is oysters, they will keep building and building and building on top of each other until the point that they can't survive because they're drying out every day. And so they can maintain that rate of sea level rise. So the reefs will keep growing as the water level goes up. The marshes, as long as there's adequate sediment in the water, they'll do the same thing. And there is a lot of sediment, suspended sediment and other sediment in the system. So essentially the answer is the marsh and reefs will just keep growing upward with sea level rise. Hope that answered it.
Yeah, I hope that answered it too. Well, we're running over time now, but I just wanted to say thank you again. Here, I'm going to come off of, I'm going to come onto the camera. I just want to say thank you, Josh and Rick, so much for having this talk today. It was really great. I hope that the public got a lot of their questions answered. We will be posting this to our Facebook page, and we'll put a link to the Corps' YouTube video of them planting the grasses. So thank you so much. And I just wanted to say that the next Sci-Cafe will be March 28th. Our very own Megan Lamb will be presenting on prescribed fire ecology in environmental restoration. So we'll have the link up for registration for that shortly. But yeah, thank you again. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. And my email and Josh's email are on there. So if there are any other questions that people have, please follow up with us directly. We're happy to try and answer your questions.
Okay.